Earlier in the course, you learned that in C#, the string keyword maps to the string class in the .NET framework. So a string is a class. And you also learned that strings are immutable, which means once you create them, you cannot change them. In this lecture, I'm going to cover a bit more details about strings. I'm going to introduce you to some useful methods to work with strings, and then I'm going to show you how to convert a string to a number and vice versa. So I've categorized these methods into different groups. In terms of formatting your string, you can use toLower to convert all characters to lowercase, or you can use toUpper for converting that to uppercase. Trim is a useful method which gets rid of the white spaces around a string. And this is important when you capture user inputs in web forms or Windows forms. If you want to search for a character or a string inside a given string, you can use the indexOf or lastIndexOf method. Both these methods have overload and they accept either a character or a string. And they return an index of the first or the last occurrence of the given character or string in your string. If you want to create a substring from a given string, you use the substring method. This method has a couple of overloads. One that takes a start index and then retrieves all the characters from that point onwards to the end of the string. The other overload takes a length argument to limit the number of characters to retrieve. If you want to replace a given character or a given substring in your string, you use the replace method. We have a couple of methods here, isNull and isNull or whitespace. And that's a common way to compare a string against null or empty string or whitespace. If you want to split a string, you can use the split method. In this example, I'm splitting a string by an empty character, which means if we have a sentence with multiple words, since there's an empty character between each of these words, they will all be split, and what will be returned from this method is an array of strings, each element containing a word. It's a very common technique to summarize a long string into a smaller one. I will show you that in the coding demo. There are times that you get a string representation of a number and you need to convert it to a numeric value. For example, in most applications, when the user types in a number into a text box, we always get a string, even if that string is a number. So we need to manually convert that to a number. There are a couple of different ways to achieve this. We can use integer.parse, or we can use convert.toInt32. I personally prefer convert.toInt32 because if the string is null or empty, this method returns the default value for the integer, which is 0, whereas int.parse throws an exception. So it's easier and safer to work with convert.toInt32. And finally, if we have a number and we would like to convert it to a string, we can use the toString method on that number. We can call this method without any arguments, which means you can get a string representation of that number. Or you can format that number using a format string. So in the third line here, C is a format string, and that's short for currency. So as you see in the example, when you format a number to currency, you get the $sign, and every 3 digit is separated by a comma. And by default, when you format a number as currency, it's going to have 2 decimal point numbers. If you don't want decimal point, you can use C0. Or if you want 1 decimal point, you can use C1. Here is a list of common format specifiers in C#. So C for currency, D for decimal, E for exponential, F for fixed point, and X for hexadecimal. Alright, now let's flip over to Visual Studio and let's see all these concepts in action.